suicide prevention. Let me start with kind of reminder that in 2019 we celebrated the World Mental Health Day with the theme of mental health promotion and suicide prevention. That again becomes very relevant in today's context of the global COVID-19 pandemic. Let me start mentioning about the movie Sholay. We all have watched this Bollywood blockbuster. In the movie, there is a scene where Dharmendra, holding a drinking bottle, is standing in a water tank high above from ground level and threatening to commit suicide. And by this term, the villagers of Ramgarh becoming confused, and one villager asking the other, "Ye suicide kya hai bhai?" Then the fellow villager replies, "Jab Angrez log marte hai to use suicide kehte." Why I have mentioned about this clip is suicide or self-murder, how seriously the society is taking it. Because there are myths associated with this phenomenon, which is very enigmatic at times. We need to ask ourselves, what is our opinion regarding this statement? When one method of suicide is no longer available, people automatically turn to another. We agree or disagree with this statement. Let us come to another statement. Asking about suicide in a person at risk increases the risk, whether we agree or disagree. We'll come to the questions again in the end. In psychiatry, suicide is the primary emergency. And we can see that most of the suicide cases occur because of mental illness, like depression. And today we are in such a situation where effective treatment is available for most of the mental disorders, including depression. In preventive modules, we usually have a two-way approach. One is for a general population, another for the high risk. Just like in the COVID-19, what we are advising for general population is the lockdown, social distancing, and for high risk, we trying for this teleconsultation, so we can directly go to them, reach them, and take into consideration their mental health issues. Likewise, for suicide prevention programs can also be one for general population and one for the high risk one. And it is seen that when one method of suicide is no longer available, people do not automatically turn to another. Moreover, if environmental changes are made such that a popular suicide site becomes safer, this does not mean that people at risk will automatically move to using another site. So clinicians involved in the development of suicide prevention strategies should look very carefully for local patterns which might provide clues about potential effective measures for reducing access to methods. Say, for example, we pass a resolution in restriction of selling of guns. That no way is going to have an impact on the rate of suicide in our society. In US, it will be an effective measure because gunshot injuries are very common there. Everybody is having a license to own a gun. But in our case, it will be the pesticides, which is very commonly available to our farmers and one of the most commonest methods of committing suicide. So if we restrict their use or if and keep it under lock and key, that can be an effective measure. So local pattern needs to be taken into account. And these strategies has to be implemented in our setup. And once successful, they need representation in global platform. This two-way concept of global and local led to globalization's another renaming called glocalization to show the positive practical implication of globalization. So as psychiatrists, we need to develop some local educational programs where the primary care clinicians should be part in the detection of mental disorders as well as their treatment. Because considering the prevalence and incidence of mental disorders and very few psychiatrists, it is not possible that all mental disorders will be treated by psychiatrists. Psychiatrists, apart from giving the services as clinicians, can at the same time become trainers, TOT, training the trainers. The role of media is very important here, as we all know about the water effect. The Goethe novel, having a character of water, how he committed suicide, that led to similar kind of deaths in Europe. And in our setup also, we see that if the death of a celebrity by suicide is reported in a very vivid way, there are some copycat phenomena. So we need to be very sensitive in reporting them. And if we approach the media how to do that, they may in return ask you healthcare professionals whether you are doing your duties correctly or not. That's why instead of accusing, we can form a consortium where both a media personnel and health personnel form a common platform to work on that. And regarding treatment of psychiatric disorders, the sufferers need to come forward for treatment. For that, there has to be a willingness, and they should be aware that they are suffering from a mental disorder. For that, we need to change the attitude and knowledge of the society. Because even today, a patient having mental disorder coming to a psychiatrist or mental health professional is very low compared to those going to faith healers. We need to create attitude and knowledge favorable for awareness and willingness. That only can help in treatment of psychiatric disorders. And volunteer-run telephone helplines can be a very useful method in those harboring suicidal ideas. And that local prevention strategies that we talked about can become very helpful in such scenarios. So government is providing a platform. We, the psychiatrists and the mental health professionals, now need to highlight the factors which are important to work hand in hand to provide the best service to the service users. For patients with psychiatric disorders, they are a high-risk population for committing suicide. Therefore, we need to identify them, and at the very beginning, if we intervene, we can reduce the rate of suicide. Newer psychiatric treatments are very beneficial in this regard, and substance abuse, another kind of psychiatric disorder. Moreover, the relational problems can also be an important cause for self-harm or suicidal behaviors, where the support system can play a big role. And when you talk about support system, what does it mean? It's nicely explained by this scenario from Diwar movie, where Amitabh is saying that apne paas building hai, property hai, bank balance hai, kya hai tumhare paas? And Sasi Kapoor replies, mere paas maa hai. So there is good evidence that well-trained non-medical psychiatric staff can effectively carry out assessments and arrange aftercare. So the TOT that we are talking about, training the trainers, can be a very effective module to reach out the needy. We need to teach about the red flag signs. For example, any kind of or even expression of self-injurious behavior is to be taken seriously. It is said that anybody who attempts suicide gives a hint in some form or the other. In those cases, the continuous surveillance is very important and to alert the caregiver about the risk of suicide. And if we find any indication of low mood, then we should promptly ask about self-injurious ideation. It is a myth that asking about suicidality will increase the risk. Instead, just the opposite happens, because the individual who is harboring such thoughts, by asking that, will feel empathic with the therapist. And this empathy will lead to a two-way communication in the form of rapport that helps in a therapeutic alliance, leading to successful treatment of the underlying disorder, thus decreasing the risk. Certain occupational groups are known to be at high risk because of availability of means to commit suicide. Doctors were one of such groups. And in patients having suicidal ideations, we do find changes in the brain, both structural as well as neurochemical. A decreased 5-hydroxytryptamine level has structures like amygdala, orbitofrontal cortex, and ventromedial prefrontal cortex may be the pathophysiology for suicidal ideation. And we need to identify the risk factors like mental disorder, a man, elderly, having history of previous attempts, having family history of such attempts, harboring ideas of suicide, feeling hopeless, helpless. Then there is associated substance abuse and anxiety. If staying alone and isolated, there are many worries. And if the means of committing suicide are available and there is history of abuse by others, present or past, can be risk factors for suicide. It would be an ideal situation if we could prevent all attempts of suicide, which may not be practically possible, but preventive measures and thus reducing the rate is definitely possible. And about treatment, after a prompt diagnosis, we have got both psychiatric and psychotherapeutic treatment options for a comprehensive management of individuals. Thus, coming back to the questions that we asked ourselves at the very beginning, when one method of suicide is no longer available, people automatically turn to another. Of course, no. And asking about suicide in a person at risk increases the risk. Another big no. Instead, just the opposite happens. Thank you.